Picture a town, homes, churches, a hotel, a bar, a bookshop, a beauty salon. Now remove everything above the ground. No windows facing the street, no front gardens, no rooftops you can see. Just flat, red, cracked earth, stretching out in every direction, dotted with thousands of strange pipes and chimneys, poking up from the dirt like something left over from a war, because in a way, that's exactly what it is. Welcome to Coober Pedy, South Australia. Population, roughly 1,500. And most of them are living right now in the rock beneath your feet. This isn't a gimmick. It isn't a tourist attraction. It is the only logical response to a place that actively tries to kill you above ground. Temperatures here regularly hit 50 degrees Celsius in summer. There is almost no rain, barely 150 millimeters a year. The nearest major city is over 800 kilometers away, and the land is so hostile that the first tree ever planted in Coober Pedy was welded together from scrap iron. But the people stayed, and when the world above became unlivable, they didn't leave. They went down. How this place came to exist. To understand why people live underground here, you need to understand why anyone came here in the first place. And the answer is one of the strangest accident stories in Australian history. It's 1915. A 14-year-old boy named Willie Hutchison is trudging through this barren desert with his father, who is on a desperate prospecting trip, looking not for opals, but for gold. They find nothing. The trip is a failure. On the way back, the boy wanders off from camp and kicks at something glinting in the dirt. It's opal, one of the most valuable gemstones on Earth, found by accident by a teenager in one of the most remote, uninhabitable corners of the continent. Within 2 years, hundreds of miners had descended on what would become Coober Pedy. And here's the detail that almost nobody talks about. Many of the earliest miners weren't prospectors at all. They were soldiers. Men who had just returned from the trenches of World War I in France and Belgium, men who had spent years literally living underground in dugout trenches, sleeping in holes in the earth, surviving beneath the surface while the world above was on fire. When those men arrived in the Australian desert and felt the violence of the summer heat, their solution was almost instinctive. They had spent years underground. They knew what it meant to dig, and so they started digging again. Not out of desperation this time, but out of experience. The first underground homes in Coober Pedy were built by men who had already been living in holes in the ground in Flanders. They just swapped mud for sandstone. That psychological detail sits at the heart of this town. Coober Pedy was never built by people who gave up and went home. It was built by people who refused to, the underground world. So what does it actually look like down here? From the surface, you'd have no idea a house was below you. The only signs of life are those strange ventilation pipes, single oxygen shafts that poke up from the earth, sometimes the only indication that an entire family is living 3 meters beneath your shoes. Walk around Coober Pedy carelessly and you might step through someone's ceiling. Below ground, the homes, called dugouts, are not what you'd imagine. Most people hear underground home and picture something damp, dark and cramped. What you actually find is large, dry, well-lit sandstone rooms with carved bookshelves, arched ceilings, and sometimes, impossibly, swimming pools. The sandstone is remarkably workable, soft enough to carve, solid enough to hold its shape. And once you're inside, the temperature is a constant 22 to 24 degrees Celsius. Year-round, no air conditioning required, no heating bills in winter. The earth does all of it for free. Here's a detail that changes how you think about the whole town. In the past, grocery stores in Coober Pedy sold explosives over the counter. Residents would quite literally blast the walls of their own homes outward to add new rooms. Need a guest bedroom? Grab some dynamite. Expanding your kitchen? Give the wall a nudge. This was so common and so chaotic that on more than one occasion, a resident blasted through their own wall only to find themselves looking directly into their neighbor's living room. Mining in residential areas is now officially banned, but the law has one loophole that Everyone quietly exploits. You're still allowed to expand your home. So people do. They add guest rooms, utility rooms, storage, extended corridors. The underground network of Coober Pedy grows quietly and unofficially every year. The ceilings of dugouts must be at least 4 meters thick to prevent collapse, a regulation that also means most rooms feel remarkably spacious, more like cathedral vaults than caves. And here's the economic fact that surprises everyone. Building a dugout costs roughly the same as building an equivalent home above ground. But you never pay for air conditioning, and you're never vulnerable to the sandstorms that strip paint off cars and push red dust through every seal and gap above the surface. Some residents have gone further. One of the most fascinating homes is Faye's underground home, started over 60 years ago as a single-room dugout used by a mail truck driver. Faye Naylor bought it and spent decades expanding it. That original single room is now just the kitchen. The rest of the home sprawls out behind it in a warren of carved chambers, entirely hand-dug. And it's not just homes. Coober Pedy has underground churches, 3 of them, underground hotels where opals are embedded in the walls of guest rooms glinting in the lamplight, an underground art gallery, an underground bookshop, an underground bar, even an underground Serbian Orthodox church of Saint Elijah, hand-carved from the rock. When you stay in the hotel and wake up in a sandstone room with a gemstone winking at you from the wall, it stops feeling like survival. It starts feeling like something else entirely. Who actually lives here? This is the part that most travel content gets completely wrong about Coober Pedy. It is presented as a quirky, eccentric outback town, and it is those things. But the picture is much more complicated and much more interesting than that. Coober Pedy has 45 different nationalities living within it. For a town of 1,500 people in the middle of the Australian desert, that number is almost incomprehensible. You have Greek families who came in the 1960s and never left, Serbian communities who built their own underground church, Croatian miners, Italian families, Aboriginal Australians, including the Antakirinja and Yankunytjatjara peoples who have been connected to this land for thousands of years before any opal was ever found. And transient arrivals, people who drove through on the Stuart Highway, heard something that made them stay for a week and then simply didn't leave. For decades, the cultural mix produced something remarkable. After the 1960s European migration boom, the area around one early settlement became known as Bolshevik Gully, named after the strongly unionist coal miners from Broken Hill who arrived during the 1920s and brought with them fierce political convictions and a distrust of authority. That independent streak never really left. Coober Pedy has always attracted people who are, in some way, running towards something or away from something. Fortune seekers, loners, idealists, people who, specifically, don't want to be found. The most extraordinary example of this is a man known as Crocodile Harry. His real name, reportedly, was Arvid von Blumenthal, a Latvian baron who claimed to have been in hiding since World War II. He arrived in Australia and spent years hunting crocodiles in the Northern Territory, supposedly killing over 40,000 during his career. Then he came to Coober Pedy, dug himself a home, and filled it entirely with sculptures, bones, visitor graffiti, women's underwear pinned to the walls, and primitive paintings covering every surface. He became so iconic that his dugout doubled as a filming location for Mad Max, Beyond Thunderdome. He died in 2006, still claiming to be a Latvian baron in hiding. In a town like Coober Pedy, nobody asked too many questions. The Aboriginal history here runs even deeper and is far less often told. The Antakirinja people called this area Umuna, meaning long life. They had lived nomadically across these desert lands for thousands of years, mapping the landscape by waterholes and ceremonial sites. When opal was discovered and European miners arrived, those miners brought with them influenza, tuberculosis, and measles, diseases the Aboriginal community had no immunity to. The same land that made European fortunes cost Aboriginal people their lives and their connection to their sacred sites. By 1962, when a mining warden visited and recorded what he found, around 250 to 300 of Coober Pedy's 700 residents were Aboriginal, a significant proportion that tourism content consistently erases. Their story is part of the bedrock of this place, literally and figuratively. The dark underneath. Here's what the travel brochures don't mention. Coober Pedy has been described, by its own residents, in its own regional newspaper, as currently experiencing the worst crime wave in its history. Nightly break-ins at restaurants and social clubs, assaults on elderly residents. Organised crime that locals say goes largely unreported. In one period, 22 police officers were sent in from across South Australia for what residents assumed were robberies and violence, and police used the visit primarily for a traffic blitz on the main street. This is a town of boom and bust, and right now the bust is biting hard. The Opal fields that built Coober Pedy are increasingly depleted. According to an Australian parliamentary report, the industry is operating at only 20 to 50% of its value potential. New mining fields haven't been discovered. The cost of reworking old mines is high relative to what's found in them. Opal prices remain suppressed globally, which discourages new investment. The population, which once reached over 3,000 in the 1980s, has fallen to around 1,500 today. And water. The town produces its own water through a desalination and reverse osmosis plant, because there is no natural supply. Every drop consumed in Coober Pedy has to be extracted from brine or piped across the desert. The infrastructure is aging, pipes lose enormous amounts to leakage, and residents pay the highest water rates in the entire state of South Australia. For a community where a significant portion of residents are on low incomes, this isn't just inconvenient, it shapes daily life. The median age of Coober Pedy residents is 46, 8 years older than the South Australian average. Young people leave. Young families leave. What remains is an older, more established population. Resilient, deeply attached to the place, but watching the demographics slowly hollow out. And yet, the people who stay hard. You don't remain in Coober Pedy by accident. You choose it repeatedly, every time you could leave and don't. There is something about living underground, about being part of a community that has genuinely engineered a life in a place that should by rights be uninhabitable, that produces a specific kind of loyalty. A refusal to be dislodged. The surface of another planet. Walk above ground in Coober Pedy at midday in January and you understand immediately why people went underground. The landscape is unlike anything in Australia, nor anywhere. Over 250,000 mine shafts have been sunk into the earth around the town over the past century. The surface is a lunar wasteland of mullock heaps, pyramids of pale, excavated rock piled everywhere, stretching to the horizon. There are no trees, almost no green. The ground is riddled with open shafts, some unmarked, some uncovered, dropping straight down into the dark. At night, walking carelessly can mean disappearing. Hollywood noticed this a long time ago. Coober Pedy and its surroundings have appeared in Mad Max, Beyond Thunderdome, Pitch Black, Red Planet, Priscilla Queen of the Desert, and Kangaroo Jack. The landscape requires no set dressing to look like a post-apocalyptic world. It already is one. The town has a crashed spaceship prop on the main street, a leftover from Pitch Black, that nobody has removed because somehow, in Coober Pedy, a crashed alien spacecraft on the high street seems entirely appropriate. The golf course here has no grass, not a single blade. The fairways are packed red dirt, and players carry a small square of artificial turf with them that they lay down and pick up at each shot. Games are played at night, not for atmosphere, but necessity. The daytime heat would kill you. Golf balls glow in the dark. You play under stars in the dark on a course that looks like the surface of Mars. 150 million years ago, this entire region was the floor of an ancient inland sea. As water levels shifted over geological time, silica solution seeped into cracks in the sandstone and slowly hardened over millennia into opal, which is, at its most basic, solidified light water trapped in stone. The entire story of Coober Pedy is built on the bones of a vanished ocean. The gemstones people pull from the earth here are literally fossilized water. One of the most astonishing finds in the town's history came not through any sophisticated geology, but through an Aboriginal woman. Tottie Bryant, in 1946, discovered the 8-mile field, one of the most significant opal finds in the region's history. It restarted an industry that had nearly collapsed during World War II. Her name appears briefly in official histories and then disappears. In a town that was built in part on Aboriginal land, the Aboriginal contributions to its survival are consistently understated. What living here actually means. Ask the people who've been here for decades why they stay, and the answers are remarkably consistent. It's not the opal, it's not the economics. Because the economics don't work well anymore, it's something harder to explain. People describe a silence underground that you cannot find above the surface. No wind noise, no traffic, no temperature fluctuations that jar you awake. The rock absorbs sound the way it absorbs heat. In a dugout, the world above you simply disappears. Families who came from Greece or Croatia or Serbia in the 1960s, planning to make their fortune and go home, found instead that going home became harder each year. The place accumulates you. There are people here who have never looked for opal a single day in their lives. Teachers, mechanics, nurses, who live underground simply because it makes practical sense, and who have quietly decided that this strange, scarred, overheated corner of the world is theirs. An underground Airbnb run by a Swedish couple, an underground home that a mail truck driver started and a woman expanded for 6 decades. Ventilation pipes poking out of the earth as the only sign that beneath your feet someone is reading a book, cooking dinner, raising children. The town has a drive-in cinema that operates on warm evenings, one of the last remaining in South Australia. And when the film plays against the desert dark, with the mullock heaps silhouetted against the stars and the underground town invisible below the earth, it feels like something from a world that shouldn't exist. But it does. Stubbornly, impossibly, it does. Coober Pedy should not exist. Every variable, the heat, the isolation, the lack of water, the exhausted minds, argues against it, and yet the population hasn't vanished. The underground churches still hold services. The underground bar still pours drinks. Somewhere beneath the red desert tonight, in a carved sandstone room at a constant 23 degrees, someone is doing exactly what people have done here for over 100 years, surviving and calling it home. There is something in that, in the specific human stubbornness of building a life in the one direction nobody expected, that feels less like a curiosity and more like a lesson. The people of Coober Pedy didn't fight the desert. They didn't try to change it. They went beneath it, and they stayed. The town above ground looks like the end of the world. The town below ground looks like people living in it anyway.